Last notes on Rampa. Hello, Rampa family. I'd like to share some final notes with you on Lobsang Rampa now that we've come to the end of his books. There are 3 things that I'd like to mention. First, I'm finished reading his works, though there are 2 other books in his list, but I will not be recording those. One is entitled Wisdom of the Ancients, which is more or less a dictionary of Sanskrit terms with a bit of info on diet and touchstones. The other is entitled Living with the Llama, and it was written by Cleo and Taddy, his 2 cats. There is a 3rd book that I understand is erroneously attributed to him, entitled My Flight to Venus, but it is not his work. It's not his writing, and he often stated that his name had been used by someone else who wrote the book, but Dr. Rampa was not the author. In addition, there are several books available that were written by Mrs. Rampa as well as by Sheelagh Rouse, his friendly office assistant. I will list those books below in the description box. I believe Mrs. Rampa's books are available online in PDF format. Secondly, I'd like to read for you 2 newspaper clippings concerning his death. We were stationed in Ontario the year that Dr. Rampa passed away, and the following little article appeared in the Toronto Star, January 29th, 1981. Quote, Lobsang Rampa wrote on the occult. T. Lobsang Rampa, once controversial mystic and author of books on the occult, has died at 70. Rampa died of heart failure in a Calgary hospital Sunday, but his death was kept quiet to avoid publicity, Sarah Rampa, his wife, said in a telephone interview. His body was cremated Monday. The couple lived in seclusion in various parts of Canada for more than 20 years after Rampa, who claimed to be a Tibetan mystic and former advisor to the Dalai Lama, was attacked in his native England as a fraud. Unquote. The second clipping, much longer, comes from the Calgary Library. Mrs. Rampa did not place an obituary in any of the newspapers because she didn't want to arouse publicity concerning his death. However, a reporter from the Calgary Herald did write an article nonetheless, and I'll include the link to this article below in the description box in case you'd like to have a copy. Quote, Controversial mystic dies at 70. T. Lobsang Rampa, once a controversial mystic and author of books on the occult, has died after a long illness. It was learned Wednesday. He was 70. Rampa died of heart failure in a Calgary hospital Sunday, but his death was kept quiet to avoid publicity, his wife Sarah Rampa said in a telephone interview. His body was cremated Monday. The couple had lived in Calgary for 8 years and had no children. Rampa had lived in seclusion in Canada for more than 20 years. But until the late 1950s, he was a controversial figure in British literary circles. The accuracy of his books on Tibetan mysticism were questioned, and he was attacked as a fraud for his claim to being a Tibetan mystic. His first book, The Third Eye, detailed the life he claimed to have led as a young boy in the Tibetan lamasery of Shakpori. It described his receipt of mystic powers through an operation performed by Tibetan Buddhist monks. Rampa also claimed he had been an advisor to the Dalai Lama, served in the Chinese military in the Second World War, and had spent time in Russian and Japanese concentration camps. The final printing of The Third Eye in 1956 sold 300,000 copies, most of them in Britain. A loose coalition of scholars compiled a list of what they considered factual errors in the book, and said the errors showed Rampa was not from Tibet. But the strongest charges of hoax came after this group hired a private detective to investigate Rampa's background. The detective's report said Rampa was really Cyril Henry Hoskin, born in Devon, England. It said he had caught the bug of Eastern mysticism while working as a career counselor in London. In a statement aired on British television at the height of the controversy, Rampa said the body of Hoskin had been taken over completely by the spirit of a Tibetan mystic. Years later, he changed his name legally to Tuesday Lobsang Rampa. The person whose place he took was born in England, Sarah Rampa, his wife of 30 years, said Wednesday. He's not the person I married. He created a great deal of jealousy. When he started to write, he made all of the Tibetan books obsolete, and they vowed to destroy him, said Mrs. Rampa. The Rampas left England for the Republic of Ireland, where they lived briefly before coming to Canada in 1958 to escape Britain's heavy tax laws and what Mrs. Rampa termed press hounding. The couple lived in the Maritimes and Ontario and Vancouver before settling in Calgary, giving up their British citizenship to become Canadians in 1973. Rampa received no honorary recognition after coming to Canada except for a certificate of merit from the Alberta government, Mrs. Rampa said. Despite adverse publicity, Rampa wrote 19 books on experience with such phenomena as astral projection and reincarnation. Unquote. At this moment in time, I'm understanding that Mrs. Rampa is now deceased, and Mrs. Rouse, also known as Buttercup, is alive and well, living here in Canada. And then, thirdly, I admit that I struggled for years with the issue of controversy over whether Rampa was simply Cyril Hoskin pretending to be a Tibetan Lama, or was he truly a transmigrated Tibetan Lama. And then one day we were driving through Calgary, and I had a personal little revelation which resolved the matter for me, and I was finally able to put it to rest. As you recall, Rampa had written in his books that he had lived in many different places, from England to Ireland to Uruguay, Canada, and then once in Canada he lived in Ontario and BC, and yet he was never fully comfortable in any of those places until he moved to Calgary, where he lived the last 8 or so years of his life. Calgary was home to him, and he was happy living there. So now, as I mentioned, we were driving through Calgary when suddenly, for some unknown reason, my imagination kicked in, and the skyscrapers and offices and housing tracts just melted away, and instead I saw golden grassy plains with a ridge of rolling foothills, and behind them the ridge of snow-covered Rocky Mountains, and I heard myself say, Calgary looks exactly like the old photos of the Valley of Lhasa, and even the winter temperatures are the same. No wonder he felt so comfortable here. And then the view of old Calgary faded away and the modern Calgary reappeared, and everything looked normal again. But this little insight happened in just seconds, but it resolved the issue for me once and for all. But no matter how you resolve the controversy, at the end of the day, his intent to teach us the hidden side of ourselves and show us the greater selves that we are was his greatest gift to us. He wanted us to know that earth life is nothing but shadows, and that all that we see is merely reflections of our own thoughts materialized for us to experience. So, if you were uplifted and grew by his teachings, then Dr. Rampa's life was well done. One last note. I have truly enjoyed reading these books for you. It's been my great pleasure all the way. My own interest these past 30 years has been on esoteric topics, so I'm going to continue reading books with esoteric content, and if you share the same interests, perhaps you'll continue to check my channel from time to time. And I want to say thank you so much for giving me this chance to contribute to the community. BlueFriend.